Okay guys, I'm gonna do something a little different this week. I miss reading chapter books with you. Do you remember when we would get all packed up at the end of the day and then read part of a chapter book together? We read Charlotte's Web and Mercy Watson. Well, I miss those times, and I happened to come across Flat Stanley. Now, some of you may have gotten a little something from me in the mail. If you haven't gotten anything yet, just hang tight. It's on its way. If you don't get anything and it's Thursday or Friday this week, then let me know. I need to resend it because I might have had the wrong address. But anyways, going back to Flat Stanley, I'm gonna read a chapter every day, and I thought it would be best if I broke it up because it would be a long video if I read the whole chapter book in one video. So there's 5 chapters in here, and I'm gonna read one chapter and post it for each day of the week this week. So you can decide if you can't wait and you just wanna know what's gonna happen next, go ahead to the next day and click on our chapter book read aloud so that you can see what's gonna happen next. If you just wanna do one chapter a day, that's fine. If you're not interested in Flat Stanley, don't feel like you have to read it with us. But I would love for you to follow along with us if you have your own book. If not, just sit back and listen, and I'm not even gonna ask you questions afterwards. This is just to enjoy listening to, okay? So here we go, chapter 1 of Flat Stanley. Now there are some pictures, so I'll be sure to show them to you before I turn the page. Chapter 1 is titled The Big Bulletin Board. Breakfast was ready. "I will go wake the boys," Mrs. Lambchop said to her husband, George Lambchop. Just then, their younger son, Arthur, called from the bedroom he shared with his brother, Stanley. "Hey, come look, hey!" Mr. and Mrs. Lambchop were both very much in favor of politeness and cheerful speech. "Hay is for horses, Arthur, not people," Mr. Lambchop said as they entered the bedroom. "Try to remember that." "Excuse me," Arthur said, "but look!" He pointed to Stanley's bed. Across it lay the enormous bulletin board that Mr. Lambchop had given the boys a Christmas ago so that they could pin up pictures and messages and maps. It had fallen during the night on top of Stanley. But Stanley was not hurt. In fact, he would still have been sleeping if he had not been woken up by his brother's shout. "What's going on here?" he called cheerfully from beneath the enormous board. Mr. and Mrs. Lambchop hurried to lift it from the bed. "Heavens!" said Mrs. Lambchop. "Gosh!" said Arthur. "Stanley's flat. Oh my goodness." "As a pancake," said Mr. Lambchop. "Darndest thing I'd ever seen." "Let's all have breakfast," Mrs. Lambchop said. "Then Stanley and I will go see Dr. Dan and hear what he has to say." In his office, Dr. Dan examined Stanley all over. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Does it hurt very much?" "I felt sort of tickly for a while after I got up," Stanley Lambchop said, "but I feel fine now." "Well, that's mostly how it is with these cases," said Dr. Dan. "We'll just have to keep an eye on this young fellow," he said when he had finished the examination. "Sometimes we doctors, despite all our years of training and experience, can only marvel at how little we really know." Mrs. Lambchop said she thought Stanley's clothes would have to be altered by the tailor now, so Dr. Dan told his nurse to take Stanley's measurements. Mrs. Lambchop wrote them down. Stanley was 4 feet tall, about 1 foot wide, and 1/2 inch thick. It's about that thick. He is very flat. Chapter 2, Being Flat. All right, I'm going to stop it here. You can go to the next day if you want to hear the next chapter.